When we think of a university, I think we usually have um, this very specific, almost cinematic image in our heads. Like we picture these heavy, immovable things, sprawling green quads, massive libraries with uh, those little green reading lamps, stone buildings that have been there for a century.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We think of an institution that is, well, fundamentally rooted in its physical geography.
Right, exactly.
It's a comforting concept, because it's tangible. You can physically walk through the wrought iron gates, look around, and say, I have arrived at the university. It's a bounded space.
But what happens when that stone building suddenly hits a geographic wall? Like what happens when the host country turns around and says, we actually don't have enough physical infrastructure, enough housing, enough real properties, enough roads for all the people who want to come to this physical building?
Well, then you get the massive structural paradigm shift that is unfolding right now with Australia's new international student caps.
You do. And the solution we are seeing play out isn't to just, build more physical beds or lay more bricks. The universities are essentially stripping away the stone buildings, right, digitizing the curriculum, and just exporting the entire campus experience across the globe. So our mission for you on this deep dive is to unpack this high-stakes strategic chess game currently playing out in Australia's higher education sector.
Right, because it really is a chess game.
It totally is. We're looking at a new 295,000 international student CAF, how 8 major Australian universities are strategically bypassing these limits by setting up physical branch campuses in places like India, and the immense hidden pressures this offshore expansion places on digital infrastructure and the academic staff.
And we've pulled together an incredibly rich stack of sources for this deep dive. We're drawing from official Australian government fact sheets on the national planning level, regulatory amendments from Australia's Higher Education Quality Agency, TQSA.
Yeah, the TQSA stuff is wild.
It really is. We also have parliamentary inquiry submissions from the Group of 8 universities and the University of Wollongong, some breakdowns from educational consultancies, and some really fascinating academic research papers on hyperflexible learning and online assessments.
So the contradiction at the heart of all this source material is what really catches my attention. Like, to protect domestic infrastructure, specifically the housing market, Australia is capping the number of students who can physically arrive. But the universities aren't just, accepting fewer students and shrinking their budgets. They're creating a whole new set of invisible infrastructures to manage massive offshore populations.
Yeah, it's the decoupling of the student from the physical geography of the university. It's wild. A policy that was fundamentally designed to solve a domestic housing problem has unintentionally accelerated a massive transnational transformation in how higher education is even delivered.
Right. And to really grasp how the universities are working around the rules, I want to first lay out exactly what the rules are for you. The baseline here is the national planning level, or the NPL. The Australian government has set this ceiling for new international student commencements at 270,000 for the calendar year 2025. Then it bumps up to 295,000 for 2026, and it is slated to hold steady at 295,000 for 2027.
Context is so crucial when we look at those numbers, though, because according to the Department of Education data we reviewed, that 295,000 figure is, well, technically an increase of 25,000 places from 2025, but it is still about 8% below the massive post-COVID peak.
Right, the post-COVID rush was just unprecedented.
Exactly. When the borders reopened, there was this immense pent-up demand. Visa approvals hit over 261,000 in a single financial year. The government is essentially trying to bring the commencement numbers back down to a pre-pandemic baseline, to manage the growth in a way that the country's infrastructure can actually digest.
I noticed in the policy documents, though, that this isn't a traditional hard cap. I think when people hear cap, they think of like a bouncer at a nightclub.
Yeah, right.
Once the club hits maximum capacity, the velvet rope goes across and nobody else gets in. But the sources describe this MPL as a traffic light processing system.
And that is a fundamental distinction. The national planning level operates as a prioritization system used by the Department of Home Affairs. Rather than one giant national quota, every single education provider in Australia, every university, every college, is given an individual calculated allocation within that total national number.
So it's hundreds of individual buckets rather than one big national pool.
Yes. And when an offshore student applies for a visa to study at a specific university, Their application is assessed against that specific university's bucket. This is where the traffic light comes in. As long as a university is sitting below 80% of its allocation, which is the specific threshold the government has set for 2026, any visa applications for that university are treated as priority one. They are in the green zone. The processing is swift and streamlined.
But the moment that university enrolls enough students to hit that 80% mark, the system shifts.
The system shifts entirely. They move into the amber and eventually red zones. It's not that the government automatically rejects the next application, it's that the processing speed slows to a crawl. The applications are deprioritized and moved to the back of the queue, making it, well, incredibly difficult for the university to reliably enroll that student before the semester starts.
So the government hasn't built an impenetrable brick wall around the country. They've just installed a really, really aggressive traffic light system. If your chosen university is in the green, you get a green light. If they're in the red, you might be sitting at that administrative intersection for months.
Exactly. And if we push that traffic light analogy just a little further, the government has also engineered some highly specific, fully exempt bypass lanes.
Oh, right, the TAFE at the heart policy. I was reading through the consultancy breakdowns, and they highlight a major structural change taking effect in 2026. If an international student completes secondary school physically inside Australia, or if they transition into a public university from a recognized pathway provider, or a TAFE institute, which, for those who don't know, is Australia's vocational education sector, they do not count against that public university's individual NPL allocation at all.
Furthermore, the TAFE enrollments themselves are entirely exempt from the national cap.
That is a massive incentive. Like, if you take the vocational back road, you bypass the toll booth entirely. You don't use up one of the university's cap spots. But why is the government structuring the incentives this way?
It really comes down to two major pressures: infrastructure and workforce. The government is trying to ease the intense, hyper-localized pressure on the domestic rental market. If we look at the Property Council of Australia data we reviewed, international students make up about 4% of the total rental market nationally.
Which doesn't sound like a lot on its own.
Right, but they aren't spread out evenly. In 13 specific local government areas, they account for over 10% of the rental market. In areas like Adelaide CBD or Sydney's Burwood, international students make up nearly a quarter of all renters.
Oh, wow. So that creates highly visible friction in the community. When a quarter of the apartments in a suburb are suddenly absorbed by short-term international arrivals, it drives up rents for locals and creates a major political headache. And just to be clear for you listening, we aren't taking a stance on the politics of the housing crisis here, just reporting what the policy document state is driving this decision.
Exactly. And that friction threatens what policymakers call the social license of the international education sector. The public needs to believe the system is under control, so the government caps the primary influx of university students. But by creating these specific tie-off pathway exemptions, they are strategically steering the students who do come toward vocational training.
Right, because that produces the electricians, builders, and healthcare workers that Australia desperately needs. There's also a fascinating carve-out I noticed for housing. From 2026, universities can apply to the government to increase their specific NPL allocation, but only if they can prove they are actively building new, purpose-built student housing to accommodate those extra students. It's a direct quid pro quo. You want more students? Bring your own beds.
It's a clever policy lever, but universities are massive, highly complex, multi-billion-dollar organizations. When the front door to their primary market is heavily metered by this traffic light system, and the back roads require students to already be in the country doing high school or vocational training well, they start looking very closely at the fine print for another route.
And that search for a side door brings us to transnational education, or TNE. This is where the sheer scale of the strategic pivot becomes apparent. The government is tightly controlling who can physically enter the domestic housing market, but they have left very explicit exemptions for students studying under Australian transnational education programs.
Let's look at the breakdown from the AEMG webinar in our sources. For a joint program to be officially exempt from the domestic enrollment cap, it has to navigate a very specific set of criteria known as the 60% rule.
Okay, what's that?
The first requirement is mathematical. More than 60% of the joint program's total study duration must be physically completed offshore, outside of Australia.
So it can't just be a quick semester abroad. It has to be the bulk of the degree.
Right, exactly. Second, the program has to be formally registered by the foreign government where it is being offered. And third, the Australian university has to provide tangible, active teaching inputs.
Let's pause on that teaching inputs phrase, because that seems legally critical. They can't just engage in a rubber stamp licensing deal where an Australian university just emails a syllabus and a logo to a college in another country and collects a fee.
Exactly. It must be an active pedagogical partnership. This regulation covers what the sector calls hybrid or twinning arrangements. You'll often see these advertised as 2+2, 3+1, or even 3+1+1 models.
And for those unfamiliar with the jargon, a 2+2 model means a student studies for 2 years at a partner institution in their home country and then completes the final 2 years onshore at the parent university in Australia.
Right, and as long as the math works out so that the offshore component hits that required 60% threshold, those students are granted exemptions or relaxed weightings against the cap when they finally arrive in Australia.
But, I mean, if 60% gets you an exemption for a hybrid model, the obvious question is, what happens if a student just stays home and does 100% of the degree offshore?
Then they bypass the cap entirely.
Wait, entirely?
Entirely. If a student completes their entire course of study overseas, they never require an Australian student visa. They never rent an Australian apartment, and they never take a seat on an Australian train. Therefore, the Australian government explicitly and completely excludes them from the national planning level.
The strategic implications of that are wild. The government is essentially telling the higher education sector, we cannot allow you to bring 50,000 new people into the physical cities of Sydney and Melbourne this year. However, if you want to enroll 50,000 new people in your programs while they sit in their own home countries, well, we won't stop you.
It is a win-win on paper for the macroeconomy. By decoupling offshore enrollments from the strict domestic caps, the government is actively providing a legal workaround for institutions to grow their revenue and scale their global brand without importing the politically toxic housing strain.
But you can't build a massive global university ecosystem entirely out of Zoom rooms and PDF downloads. High-paying students still want a physical campus experience. They want the libraries, the labs, the student unions. So if they can stay home and bypass the cap, where exactly are these Australian universities setting up shop?
That physical migration of the campus is happening fastest in India. It has really become the absolute epicenter of this offshore boom.
Yeah, looking at the list of expansions in our sources, it is staggering. We're talking about 8 major Australian universities either actively establishing or having already opened physical branch campuses across India. Deakin University and the University of Wollongong, often referred to as UOW, are both already operating in Gift City, which is in the state of Gujarat.
And just to add some context here, GIFT-TC stands for Gujarat International Finance Tech City. It's a massive, purpose-built smart city designed specifically by the Indian government to attract global finance and global education. They have created special economic zones with highly favorable regulatory frameworks, specifically to lure institutions like Deakin and UOW.
And it doesn't stop at Gujarat. We have the University of Southampton now. I know they are a UK institution, but they are setting up in Gurugram, which really highlights that this is a massive global trend and not just an isolated Australian phenomenon. Then you have UNSW Sydney opening a campus in Bengaluru. Victoria University is also heading to Gurugram. The University of Western Australia, UWA, is establishing presences in Mumbai and Chennai. And Western Sydney University is slated to open a major campus in Greater Noida in 2027.
The most critical distinction to make here, though, is about ownership and academic integrity. These are not loose partnerships. These are not like tie-ups where an Indian college uses an Australian curriculum. These are fully owned, standalone, physical branch campuses. If you are an Indian student and you graduate from the University of Wollongong Gift City campus, your degree does not have an asterisk on it. You receive a University of Wollongong degree.
The sources are emphatic about this. The academic content, the pedagogical standards, the assessment rigor, they're identical to the parent campus in New South Wales. And India's higher education regulator, the University Grants Commission, or UGC, fully recognizes this. Under the UGC regulations of 2023, degrees obtained from these foreign branch campuses carry the exact same academic standing as if the student had flown to the parent campus. There is no special equivalent certificate required. Graduates can use these degrees for Indian civil service exams, corporate recruitment, everything.
Which brings us to the financial proposition for the student, because the tuition arbitrage here is fascinating. The cost to attend these branch campuses is drastically lower, often up to 50% less than the onshore equivalent in Australia.
Let's break down the actual numbers for you. At the UOW's Gift City campus, a student can enroll in a graduate certificate in computing for roughly 6.21 lakh Indian rupees. To put that in context for our global listeners, that's roughly 11,000 Australian dollars. A full master's degree in financial technology at the same campus runs about 18.62 lakh rupees, which sits around 33,000 Australian dollars. Deakin University is offering a Master of Cybersecurity for about 26.43 lakh rupees, or roughly 47,000 Australian dollars.
And if we compare that to the traditional onshore route, if that exact same student wanted to pack their bags, fly to Australia, and study that exact same master's degree at the parent campus.
They would be looking at tuition fees ranging from 24 to 40 lakh rupees per year, plus the exorbitant cost of living and housing in an Australian city. For an undergraduate degree, the gap is even more severe. A 3-year undergrad onshore in Australia could easily cost a student 1.5 to 2.5 crore rupees, which is between 270,000 and 450,000 Australian dollars total. But at an India branch campus, the total cost drops to around 60 to 90 lakh rupees. It's a staggering discount.
It is a massive financial incentive. You are getting the globally recognized, highly prestigious piece of paper for half the price while continuing to live in your home country.
I do have a major pushback on the value proposition here, though. If I am an international student, I might be paying half price, but I am losing the golden ticket. I am losing the post-study work visa. A massive driver of international education has always been the migration pathway, the right to stay and work in Australia for 2, 3, or 4 years after graduation. But if I never physically study in Australia, I don't qualify for that visa. Doesn't stripping away the migration outcome completely change the demographic of who is applying?
That is the pivot upon which this entire India strategy rests. Yes, the migration pathway is entirely removed. Therefore, the universities are no longer selling a pathway to an Australian passport. They are appealing to a completely different market segment.
Who exactly are they targeting then?
They are targeting the rapidly expanding Indian middle and upper middle class. These are students who want a world-class education, who want the prestige, the international curriculum, and the rigorous pedagogy of a top-tier Australian university, but who actually plan to build their careers within the booming Indian domestic economy. The value proposition has shifted from immigration outcome to premium human capital development.
Okay, so the students get a premium degree at a 50% discount to fuel their local career. But we have to look at the other side of the ledger. If the students are paying half price and the university still has to lease buildings, hire elite academic staff, and maintain digital infrastructure, how is this financially viable for the universities?
To understand the sheer urgency behind this global expansion, we really have to look at the macro financial state of Australian universities. According to advocacy data from Universities Australia, international education isn't just a side hustle. It delivered more than half of Australia's total GDP growth in 2023. It is the nation's fourth largest export industry.
The universities rely heavily on international student fee revenue. It's a complex and highly debated topic in Australia. Universities Australia argues in their submissions that these international fees are absolutely critical to cover massive shortfalls in government funding for domestic research, teaching, and campus infrastructure.
Right, and it is worth noting that the adequacy of government funding is a deeply contested political issue domestically. Critics sometimes argue universities have simply become overly corporatized and addicted to international revenue. But regardless of where you stand on the politics of funding, and again, we're just reporting what's in the sources here, the accounting reality is stark. If you look at the group of eights, the most prestigious research universities in the country, international student fees make up a staggering portion of their operating budgets. At the University of Sydney, international fees account for 47% of their total revenue. At the University of Melbourne, it's 33%.
Wow. So when the government suddenly implements a strict national planning level cap on the number of students who can physically arrive and pay full tuition, it represents an immediate existential threat to those operating budgets.
Which is exactly why they have to find a way to make the half-price offshore degrees highly profitable. And they do that through corporate structuring.
I was reading through the submission provided by the University of Wollongong Global Enterprises, or UOWGE, to the New South Wales Parliament. It gives a really fascinating look under the hood. Usually, when a university opens a campus overseas, say they open one in the UAE or Malaysia or Hong Kong, they set it up as a completely separate legal subsidiary. It has its own local board of directors, its own regulatory reporting, and its own distinct profit and loss statement.
And crucially, there is zero cross-subsidization. The parent university in Australia does not bail out the overseas campus if it runs a deficit. In some jurisdictions, like Hong Kong, local regulatory restrictions mean that profits generated by the campus cannot even be distributed back to the parent entity in Australia. The offshore campus must be an entirely self-funding, ring-fenced ecosystem.
But India is being treated completely differently. According to the UOWGE Managing Director's testimony, the UOW India campus in Gift City is an exception to that subsidiary model. It is legally structured as a direct branch campus of the University of Wollongong itself. UOWGE simply provides the management services, but the tuition revenue flows directly into UOW's own consolidated financial statements.
This direct revenue flow is paired with what they call an asset-light expansion strategy. When UOWT was questioned during the inquiry about setting up operations in places like Saudi Arabia, they revealed they had spent less than $200,000 to establish their initial presence.
That's incredibly cheap for a university campus.
Right. They are minimizing heavy capital commitments. They aren't buying hundreds of acres of land and building billion-dollar mega campuses from scratch with massive concrete libraries.
They are leasing high-end commercial space, utilizing the existing government-subsidized infrastructure in places like Gift City, and focusing their capital purely on academic delivery, digital networks, and governance.
Exactly. It allows them to tap into the massive volume of the Indian market, scale their global brand rapidly, and do it with incredibly low physical overhead. This asset-light model is the mechanism that allows them to generate sustainable margins even when they are charging 50% less for tuition. It's a brilliant corporate strategy designed to rapidly replace the onshore revenue they are losing to the domestic caps.
But when a highly regulated, publicly subsidized industry suddenly starts acting like a multinational tech company, opening asset-light branch campuses all over the world at lightning speed, the domestic regulator is eventually going to take notice.
And they did. TQSI stepped in.
TQSA is the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency. They are the national watchdog for higher education in Australia. And looking at the recent regulatory amendments, it seems they realized very quickly that they needed a mechanism to ensure the broader academic brand of Australia wasn't being diluted in what looks, frankly, a bit like an offshore Wild West.
The Australian government absolutely views high-quality offshore delivery as vital for the economy, but they are acutely aware that offshore education carries entirely distinct risks compared to onshore delivery. If an institution cuts corners in India or Malaysia, the government can't exactly send an inspector down the street to check on the classrooms. To protect Australia's macro reputation, they pushed through severe amendments to the TQSA Act.
These new rules are not gentle suggestions. Under the amendments, higher education providers must now obtain and maintain specific, explicit authorization from TechUSA to deliver any Australian courses of study offshore. And the reporting requirements are incredibly intense. If an authorized provider wants to start a new course offshore, change the physical premises where they teach, or even cease offering a course, they are legally required to notify TechUSA within 90 days before the event even occurs.
And the penalties for non-compliance are severe. Breaching a condition of this authorization attracts a civil penalty of 120 penalty units.
Let's translate that for the listener, because penalty units is deep bureaucratic jargon. A penalty unit is a set monetary amount used to calculate fines, and it indexes upwards over time. Currently, 120 penalty units equates to roughly 37,500 Australian dollars, and that's per breach. So if a university changes 3 courses without notifying the regulator in time, they could be looking at over $100,000 in fines instantly.
Furthermore, offering an Australian higher education award offshore without any authorization at all will become a formal, actionable offense starting in late 2026. TQSA wants absolute, granular visibility over the entire global footprint of every institution so they can address quality concerns before they metastasize.
But the universities are fighting back hard against this level of red tape. The Group of 8, the Go at 8, representing the elite research universities, submitted a very pointed, almost frustrated response to the parliamentary inquiry. They argue that for self-accrediting universities, this level of constant granular notification is a massive, unnecessary administrative burden.
The Go8's core argument centers on duplication and trust. They point out that they have internal quality assurance frameworks that are already world-class. They argue there's absolutely no material difference in quality controls between a course offered at Monash University in Melbourne and that exact same course offered at Monash, Malaysia. The academic governance is identical.
They also highlighted that requiring a 90-day notification for every single course edition essentially duplicates data that the government is already collecting through massive automated systems. They cited HIMSS, which is the Higher Education Information Management System, and TCSI, the Tertiary Collection of Student Information. These are giant data pipelines that already track what universities are doing.
Right. The GO-8 is effectively saying, you already have the data. Why are you making us fill out a separate form 90 days in advance?
It's like the GO-8 is saying to the government, look, we already went through the rigorous process of getting a driver's license for the sports car. We've proven we know how to drive safely. Why are you demanding we apply for a separate, highly bureaucratic permit every single time we want to drive that exact same car in a different country?
It perfectly captures the regulatory tension. On one side, Take a Say is terrified of brand contagion. If one rogue branch campus delivers a substandard, poorly resourced degree in India, the headline isn't just bad for that one university, it damages the reputation of all Australian degrees globally, it devalues the export. On the other side, the universities are operating in a hyper-competitive, fast-moving international market against UK and US institutions. They are facing massive domestic revenue cuts due to the NPL caps, and they argue they need agile, low-bureaucracy expansion to survive financially. If they have to wait 90 days for a bureaucrat to approve a new syllabus in Gujarat, they lose market share.
That tension brings us to the hidden cost of all this corporate agility. We know these offshore and transnational education arrangements successfully bypass the physical strain on Australian housing, but delivering premium education to thousands of new students isn't magic. It requires immense energy and resources. If the strain isn't physical, no, the universities aren't building dorms and lecture halls in Sydney. Where is the strain actually going?
The answer is that the strain becomes invisible. It goes entirely digital, and it falls squarely onto the shoulders of the academic staff trying to manage it. This is where the corporate concept of infinite scalability collides violently with reality.
We looked at a really illuminating snapshot report titled Online Assessment in Australian University Business Schools. During the pandemic, every university on Earth engaged in emergency remote teaching. But the report highlights that what started as a temporary emergency pivot has now become deeply embedded, permanent architecture. Business disciplines, which traditionally have massive international student cohorts, have been fundamentally transformed.
And the challenges reported by the academics on the ground, the actual professors and course coordinators, are intense and widespread. The report categorizes 13 distinct groups of challenges. Maintaining academic integrity in an entirely online environment is a massive hurdle. Ensuring equitable technology access for students in regions with unstable internet is another. But the most prominent recurring theme across the entire sector is the massive, unsustainable increase in workload for the teaching staff.
They are spending countless hours developing complex, randomized online question banks to prevent cheating. They are managing the technical setups of new software platforms. And they're dealing with an endless flood of student appeals when the digital proctoring technology inevitably glitches or flags an innocent student.
Let's layer that ground-level reality with another piece of academic research we reviewed on the concept of the hyperflexible MBA. To run these hugely scalable, borderless programs, which are exactly the kind of programs that will be servicing these massive new offshore cohorts, universities rely on complex digital learning infrastructure. We are talking about libraries of pre-recorded asynchronous videos, highly interactive digital modules, and automated knowledge checks.
The report explicitly states that this digital architecture is what enables near-infinite scalability. And from a balance sheet perspective, that makes total sense. Once a professor records a brilliant lecture video, it costs the university the exact same amount of money to stream that video to 10 students as it does to stream it to 10,000 students. You don't need to rent a bigger lecture hall. But there is a glaring paradox here. You can infinitely scale a video file. You absolutely cannot infinitely scale a human professor's time.
And that is the exact friction point the research highlights. While the physical infrastructure scales beautifully, the human infrastructure does not. In a hyper-flexible, asynchronous online model where students are logging in from different time zones at different times, tracking student engagement requires an immense amount of manual human intervention.
The course teams aren't just teaching anymore. They are acting as data analysts and community managers. They have to constantly monitor back-end analytics to see who is falling behind. They are sending targeted nudges via email to students who haven't logged in for a week. They are literally making direct phone calls to re-engage struggling students. They are hosting endless weekly online drop-in sessions to artificially build the sense of academic community that used to happen naturally when students lingered after a physical lecture.
It begs the question, Are we just replacing a domestic housing crisis with a faculty burnout crisis?
Well,
Because the universities are still using a highly outdated metric called EFTSL to manage all of this.
okay, what exactly is EFTSL?
EFTSL stands for Equivalent Full-Time Student Load. It is the standard foundational unit of measurement used across the entire Australian university system to calculate two things: how much funding a course receives and how much workload is allocated to a professor. But EFTSL was designed in the 1980s. It is predicated entirely on traditional, physical, time-limited terms and semesters. It assumes a cohort of students all start in March, all sit in the same room for 12 weeks, and all finish in June.
But a hyper-flexible, continuous online delivery model completely shatters that metric. In a borderless online course, an Indian student might enroll in April, complete 3 modules, take a month off for a family event, binge the rest of the course in August, and finally submit their assessments in December.
Precisely. The load is no longer linear, and this causes immense friction in university human resources, IT systems, and teaching allocations. How on earth does a department head allocate a professor's workload fairly when the student load is entirely fluid, asynchronous, and spread across 3 different continents?
They can't. The systems just haven't caught up to the strategy. What we are seeing is that an asset-light model for a university's balance sheet, saving millions by not building physical campuses, often translates directly into incredibly work-heavy conditions for its digital infrastructure and its academic personnel.
But the pressure doesn't stop at the academic staff. There is another massive piece to this puzzle regarding the student experience itself. If these students at the Gift City campus in India are paying 18 lakh rupees for a master's degree, and we've already established they are not getting a visa to move to Australia, how does the university ensure they actually get a job at the end of it?
Right, because if you aren't selling a migration outcome, you absolutely have to sell employability. If you graduate with a piece of paper but no practical experience, that 18 lakh investment looks pretty hollow. How do they get practical experience when they are studying via a digital platform or an asset-light branch campus?
They do it by fundamentally innovating the concept of WIL. WIL stands for Work Integrated Learning. It has become a cornerstone of modern tertiary education globally. The underlying theory is that a student shouldn't just learn from a textbook. They need to learn by doing real, messy work for real companies while still under the umbrella of the university.
But according to a major project report we reviewed, funded by the Australian Technology Network and partnered with the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the traditional model of WIL is broken, especially for an offshore context.
The traditional WIL model is usually a long 12-week physical internship. A student goes into an office 3 days a week. But small to medium enterprises, or SMEs, which actually make up 95% of businesses globally, find it incredibly hard to manage a traditional 12-week intern. SMEs usually don't have dedicated HR departments. They don't have the spare capacity to babysit a student for 3 months.
And if it's logistically difficult for an Australian SME to manage a local student in Sydney, imagine trying to organize a traditional, physical 12-week internship for an Indian student studying an Australian degree at an asset-light branch campus in Gujarat. It's logistically impossible to do that at scale.
So the higher education sector is being forced to innovate rapidly. The ATN report breaks down 5 emerging, highly flexible WIL models designed specifically to fix this bottleneck and provide practical experience without the physical constraints.
Let's walk through these 5 models, because they show exactly how a borderless university operates. First, we have microplacements. Instead of a 12-week slog, the student engages in a hyper-condensed placement. It might be just 2 weeks, or even a few days of intensive, highly structured shadowing at a local firm. It's low risk for the business, but high impact for the student.
Second, online projects or placements. In this model, the student acts almost as a remote digital consultant. An Australian business might need market research on expansion into India. A student sitting in Mumbai can complete that 50-hour project entirely remotely, interacting with the Australian client via Zoom.
Third, they are utilizing hackathons, competitions, and industry events. Instead of long-term work, these are short, high-energy bursts of problem-solving. A corporation sponsors a specific problem, and teams of students have 48 hours to develop and pitch a solution.
Fourth, incubators and startups. Rather than placing a student into an existing corporate hierarchy, universities are building entrepreneurial hubs. Students work on their own startups or collaborate within these university-backed incubators, gaining real-world business experience without needing an external employer.
And fifth, consulting models. This is where a university curates a team of students, maybe a mix of marketing, finance, and IT students, and assigns them to tackle a specific bite-sized business problem for a real client over the course of a semester.
What is brilliant about these 5 models is how perfectly suited they are for the offshore environment we've been discussing. If a university is running an asset-light, borderless cohort, they can easily plug their students into a virtual online project for a tech company in Sydney, or run a global hackathon that connects their students in India, Dubai, and Melbourne simultaneously.
The sources show this isn't just theoretical. The University of Wollongong actually advertises a 5-day Dubai FinTech immersion program built directly into their curriculum for offshore students. That is a perfect, real-world example of these new, intensive, non-traditional Wilbur models in action. They are actively designing the curriculum to build a global, practical resume for the student, even if that student never sets foot in Australia.
It is a critical strategic necessity. For an Indian student at UOW Gift City to justify that massive tuition fee, the university must guarantee hyper-local employability. They have to replace the lost value of the Australian migration pathway with tangible, high-value career outcomes. And to do that, the university's role has to shift from merely delivering academic lectures to acting as an active, integrated broker between the student and the global job market. They have to partner with firms like KPMG, HSBC, or local Indian tech giants to facilitate these microplacements.
This has been an incredibly dense journey, so let's pull all these threads together for you. We started by looking at the physical front door to Australia, the government's $295,000 national planning level cap. We saw how this cap was implemented to ease domestic housing and infrastructure pressures, utilizing a complex traffic light visa processing system and specific vocational TAFE exemptions.
We then explored how universities, faced with capped onshore revenue, are utilizing the transnational education loophole. By leveraging the 60% hybrid rule and 100% offshore exemptions, they are completely legally bypassing those domestic caps.
This strategic pivot led us to the massive, rapid expansion of physical branch campuses across India. We look at how universities like Deakin, UOW, and UNSW are establishing asset-light footprints in places like Gift City and Gurugram. They are offering globally recognized UGC-approved degrees at up to a 50% discount, but targeting a completely different demographic by removing the post-study work visa pathway.
We followed the money, detailing how this self-funding branch campus strategy is a vital corporate survival mechanism to replace lost onshore revenue, a strategy that moved so fast it triggered a severe regulatory crackdown from TKSA, resulting in heavy penalty units and 90-day notification rules to protect the national academic brand.
And finally, we uncovered the hidden, very human costs of this massive expansion. We discussed the immense pressure on digital infrastructure, the severe burnout risk for academic staff who are trapped in outdated 1980s EFTSL workload models while managing asynchronous global cohorts, and the urgent necessity to innovate work-integrated learning with microplacements and virtual consulting to ensure these offshore students actually get jobs.
We are witnessing the real-time structural evolution of higher education. It is transforming from a localized physical experience into a distributed global network.
Which brings us right back to where we started our conversation today. That heavy, immovable stone building. That traditional physical campus.
It leaves us with a profound, almost philosophical final question to ponder. If a university can effectively strip away its physical campus, bypass its home country's geographic borders entirely, deliver a hyper-flexible digital curriculum across multiple time zones, and rely entirely on micro-online placements for real-world experience, at what point does an Australian university stop being a geographic institution altogether and simply become a borderless global licensing brand for knowledge?
That is a thought that is going to linger with me for a long time. Are we witnessing the end of the university as a place and the rise of the university as a platform? Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the massive systems around you, keep looking for the hidden infrastructure, and we will catch you next time.